What are your rights in the quote-unquote new normal of stay-at-home orders, the prohibition on public and private gatherings, the prohibition on formerly lawful protests, and the general lockdown on social and economic life? Today on Don't Talk TV, I'm going to talk about specifically your rights in the context of being issued a ticket for violation of public health and emergency orders. Hello, my name is Nicholas Wansbutter. I'm a criminal defense lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV. I've continued to receive a number of questions from viewers wondering what are their rights and what do they do if confronted with police and facing the prospect of being issued a ticket for non-compliance with emergency and or public health orders. The media and politicians have also continued to make various public statements. And therefore, today on Don't Talk TV, I want to discuss what are your rights if confronted by police or bylaw officers who are issuing you with a ticket for failure to comply with public health orders. Or if they're arresting you, as with some cases that we've seen recently, for contempt of court when gatherings have been held in the face of court orders specifically closing certain facilities. It's always important to be aware of your rights. Firstly, to ensure to the greatest extent possible that justice is done, especially justice for yourself, and because rights that are not exercised are rights that will soon be lost, and we have our rights for a reason. Our rights are here to protect all members of Canadian society and to keep our society a just and democratic one. To those who may criticize a video like this for, quote, enabling idiots, unquote, even though you may disagree with people who are opposed to the public health orders, nevertheless, you should want them to know their rights and for them to have rights for your own protection. First and foremost, you retain the right to remain silent, and as always, I recommend that you don't talk to the police and that you don't talk to bylaw officers. If they're issuing you with a ticket, take the document, speak to them only the very minimum necessary in order to identify yourself as you're required to do under these public health orders, or if you're in a vehicle as you're required to do under the Highway Traffic Act. But do not say anything further, because in this situation, as in all interactions with law enforcement, anything you say can and will be used against you. Secondly, you do retain the right to freedom of expression, which means that you do have the right to be rude to police. I certainly don't recommend it, but it's not a crime to be rude to the police and to call them things like Gestapo or Nazis. For example, there's a viral video that went around at Easter time from a gentleman in Alberta, Artur Pavlovsky, where he very loudly and in an insulting way told police and health inspectors to leave his building.
You're not welcome here. Nazis are not welcome here. Gestapo is not welcome here. Do not come back, you Nazi psychopaths. Unbelievable, sick, evil people. Intimidating people in a church during the Passover. You Gestapo, Nazi, communist, fascists.
Now, the manner in which Mr. Pavlovsky behaved towards law enforcement in that video is not illegal, but again, I do not recommend that for a number of reasons. One, again, anything you say can and will be used against you, and in my view, being rude, disrespectful, and confrontational with police is already going to put you on the back foot when it comes to dealing with the court, because it has the potential of giving a very subtle negative perception to the court of you as a person. The trier of fact may already see you as someone who's belligerent and rude, rather than just a normal Canadian citizen trying to do normal Canadian things. Now, specifically with Mr. Pavlovsky, there's a little bit of a cultural thing here. I mean, Mr. Pavlovsky is Polish. As I've mentioned in previous videos, my wife is Polish. I know lots of Polish people. In my experience, they tend to be somewhat fiery people, and that's one of the things that I love about them. And Mr. Pavlovsky's response to the police just struck me as very Polish, but in the context of more Canadian Anglo-Saxon type of culture, there's generally expected to be more reserve and more respect towards police, even if they're doing something that we disagree with. In my view, it's also inaccurate and improper to call police Gestapo or Nazis. We are very far from a scenario where police are dragging people out and disappearing them, sending them to concentration camps, or shooting them, which are the type of things that the Nazis and the Gestapo did. Now, there's certainly an argument that some people would make saying that, well, this is how they started out. They started out with bothering people and shutting down businesses, and later they started sending people to camps. In my view, we're a very far way away from that. And although it's a bit of a cliche and it's something that isn't always a defense, the police are just trying to do their jobs in these scenarios. And if we have respect for the rule of law, again, looking at a specific scenario like Mr. Pavlovsky, the police are just there to serve a document issued by a judge. I would suggest that none of us want to live in a society where police routinely take into their own hands the decision of which laws they're going to enforce and which laws they're not going to enforce. There is the rule of law, there is due process, and all people in Canadian society need to respect that due process. So if the police are coming with a warrant or a lawfully issued court document, or are enforcing a law that has not yet been struck down, in my respectful view, they're not being Nazis by enforcing that law, at least not until we get to the point where they're being given clearly immoral orders, such as to shoot people. In my view, Canadian law enforcement have earned a benefit of the doubt in this regard, given actions such as in Ontario, their refusal to accept broad new powers to arbitrarily stop people to find out where they're going during the most recent stay-at-home order. Canadian police have demonstrated that they're willing to go so far, but only so far, in following ostensibly lawful orders. So therefore, I just personally disagree with calling police Gestapo or Nazis, no matter how strongly one might disagree with the current laws that are in effect. I just simply don't agree with treating police in a manner like that. My advice is always to be very respectful and polite in all interactions with police. It's going to vastly decrease your chances of being beaten up or having other negative outcomes in the encounter, and it certainly does no harm whatsoever to your case. Now, if police are coming to serve you with a summons at your house, you have the right to not answer your door. I hearken back to episode 1 of Don't Talk TV. There is no positive obligation to answer your door. However, keep in mind that if the reason they're coming to the door is to serve you with a summons, failing to answer the door is most likely merely delaying the inevitable, and they're going to keep coming back until they serve you. But it certainly would be within your rights to not answer the door, contact a lawyer, and have the lawyer contact the police to see why they were at the door and to make arrangements for a summons to be served in due course. You do not have the right to fight or resist the police. So again, I go back to Mr. Pavlovsky. He was recently arrested for contempt of court. A court in Alberta had issued an order closing his church. Notwithstanding that, he went ahead and held a religious service, and he was then arrested on the highway afterwards. And here's a brief clip of that.
Do it the Nazi style. Do it the Nazi style! Do it! They'll taser me! Kill me! Do it the Nazi
Shame on you guys. This is not communist China. Don't you guys have family and kids?
So in that clip, Mr. Pavlovsky is offering what's often called passive resistance. It's something that people with young children, especially those around 2 or 3 years old, might be familiar with, just going limp, dropping dead weight, and forcing the police to pick him up and carry him. He is opening himself up to a charge of obstruct police by doing that. It's a criminal offense to do that. That's why I say you do not have the right to resist police or to fight with them. Now, there are some rare exceptions to that. As I pointed out in the Ocean Weisblatt arrest video, in the comments section actually, the Ontario Court of Appeal, in Her Majesty the case in Nguyen, has reinforced the fact that if police do not advise you of the reason reason for your arrest, you are not obliged to submit to that arrest. And that was outlined at paragraph 16 and 17. You also are allowed to resist an unlawful arrest. For example, the case of Her Majesty the Queen and Plummer, another Ontario Court of Appeal decision. That was a case where police were arresting an individual for failing to show ID in circumstances where they did not have the power to arrest him. So it was an unlawful arrest. He fought with them. He was ultimately acquitted of assault police. However, I agree with the Court of Appeal where they say they absolutely do not recommend that. In my view, it's always safer to be polite, be respectful, be compliant with police, and then argue your rights at a later date. Have a lawyer argue your rights in court. Do not fight with police on the side of the road, and do not make their jobs more difficult than they already are. It simply gains you nothing, and it potentially costs you a lot. You do have the right to be presumed innocent, and you have the right to require the state to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you're not. Now, this is of a special importance given recent comments by some politicians, specifically Brian Pallister, the Premier of Manitoba. So I have here an article from CTV News entitled, quote, "You will pay. Manitoba doubling COVID fines for repeat offenders." And this is from May the 7th of 2021. The article reports that Manitoba is doubling fines for repeat offenders who disobey emergency public health orders. Premier Brian Pallister made the announcement Friday morning. Pallister also said the province will be doubling default payment fees for those who fail to pay the fines on time. Now here's the key. He says, "I will say to those folks, you will pay your fine, and if you do not, you will not be driving your car. We will not issue you a driver's license. You can put your car up on blocks, and you can leave it there until you pay your fine. If you don't drive, we will garnish your wages. You will pay." Now, that tough talk from the Premier of Manitoba makes it sound like you have to pay or else. If you don't pay, they're going to take your car, they're going to take your license, and he makes it sound like you don't have the right to a trial. You do have the right to a trial. And as with any time anyone's charged, be it under the Criminal Code or under Public Health Act, my advice is that at minimum you consult a lawyer before you consider pleading guilty or paying the fine. Premier Pallister's comments seem to be calculated to intimidate people into simply paying the fine right away without setting it down for trial, but you always have the right to set it down for trial. His comments only refer to individuals who've been convicted. Now keep in mind, you can be convicted in your absence on Provincial Offence Act tickets if you do not send in the paper to the court requesting a trial date. So you certainly do not have the right to simply ignore the ticket, but you do have the right to set it for trial, and I recommend that if you disagree with these laws, set it for trial. Don't just ignore it, because then you might have your car up on blocks like Premier Pallister threatens. But you do have the right to fight it in court and raise the charter issues, raise the arguments that these public health emergency orders violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms for a number of reasons. You have the right to consult and retain legal counsel. You can call lawyers such as myself, or you may want to consider the website fightthefines.ca, where legal assistance is being offered for free for individuals who wish to fight tickets they've been issued pursuant to public health orders. You can also take a look at the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. I've mentioned in a previous video some of the cases that they're arguing, and they very helpfully posted on their website the charter applications that they've made on some of their cases, including that of James Coates. I'll post in the episode information below the links to this, but just to look very quickly, here they have their pleadings posted on the website, and this is their charter application challenging the health orders. So, for example, they're challenging the 15% of capacity restriction, saying that it infringes sections 2A, 2B, 2C, and 2D of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Section 2, that refers to the freedom of expression, freedom to assemble, freedom of religion rights that we have in Canada. They make the same arguments as regards the distancing restriction, and they also add that that's a violation of Section 7, the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. So that's a brief summary of a number of the rights that you have. This video isn't exhaustive, it can't be given the length of it, and this video also isn't legal advice. So if you're in a situation, and specific to this video, if you're in a situation where you're being confronted by police or bylaw officers wanting to issue you a ticket for violating public health orders, call a lawyer for advice. You can call another lawyer or you can call myself. My 1-855 number and my website are listed below, and we can give you specific advice tailored to the situation that you find yourself in. If there's any topics that you'd like to see me cover, please leave a comment in the comment section below. And if you found this video at all helpful or informative, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing, as well as following me on Facebook or Twitter.